I never imagined at 68 years old I'd be lying on a musty futon in my son's unfinished basement, listening to laughter and conversation overhead in the beautiful colonial home I had helped him buy. But there I was, staring at exposed pipes and cobwebs, wondering how my eldest child, the little boy I'd once nursed through countless fevers, could smile politely while his wife informed me that proper guest rooms were reserved for visitors who might advance their social standing. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Let me start from the beginning. I've always believed that being a mother means supporting your children at every stage of life, not just when they're small. After my husband Robert passed away 7 years ago, I dedicated myself to being there for my 3 children whenever they needed me. James, my eldest, had always been the ambitious one. Smart, determined, and focused on climbing the corporate ladder and presenting the perfect image to the world. When James married Vanessa 5 years ago, I was delighted. She seemed polished and well-mannered, if a bit reserved around me. Their wedding was an extravagant affair at a winery in Sonoma County, far more lavish than anything our family had ever done. I remember whispering to my younger son Michael that it must have cost a fortune. "Mom, don't worry about it," he assured me. "James says they've got it covered." What none of us knew then was that having it covered meant maxing out credit cards and taking loans they couldn't afford, setting a pattern that would shape everything that followed. James and Vanessa settled in Oak Ridge Estates, an exclusive suburb filled with executives and professionals. Their 4-bedroom colonial with its manicured lawn and 3-car garage was beautiful, but I couldn't help wondering how they afforded it on James's middle management salary, even with Vanessa's income as a part-time event coordinator. My first visit after they moved in was pleasant enough. I was given the lovely guest room with the attached bath, and Vanessa seemed genuinely happy to show me around their new home. "We want this to be a gathering place for the whole family," she said, showing me the expansive deck and fire pit in the backyard. "James says you were always the heart of your home, and we want to create that same feeling." I was touched and spent the weekend helping them plant a vegetable garden and hanging family photos. When I left, James hugged me warmly. "Thanks for everything, Mom. We couldn't have done this without you." He didn't just mean the gardening. After Robert died, I had given each of my children a portion of their inheritance early. For James and Vanessa, it had been $40,000 toward their down payment. I wanted them to have stability, to build their lives without the financial worries that had sometimes burdened Robert and me in our early years. Over the next 2 years, my visits became less frequent. There always seemed to be some reason why. The timing wasn't ideal: renovations, Vanessa's parents visiting, important dinner parties with James's colleagues. When I did visit, I noticed subtle changes. The guest room I'd previously used was being converted to a home office. The vegetable garden we'd planted had been replaced with an ornamental landscape designed by a professional. "We're focusing on curb appeal," Vanessa explained. "In this neighborhood, appearances matter." During that time, my daughter Catherine had been struggling after her divorce. She and my young grandson Ethan had moved into a small apartment, and she was working 2 jobs to make ends meet. Without hesitation, I sold my 3-bedroom home in the suburbs, the house where I'd raised my children, and bought a small condo nearby so I could help with Ethan while Catherine rebuilt her life. "Mom, you didn't have to do that," Catherine had protested. "Family helps family," I replied simply. "Your father would have wanted me to be there for you." What I didn't share with my children was that the housing market had changed significantly. Selling the family home had brought less than I'd hoped, and between helping Catherine with some immediate expenses and buying the condo, my comfortable nest egg had dwindled considerably. I wasn't destitute by any means, but I needed to be careful with my remaining savings. It was around this time that my relationship with James and Vanessa began to change more noticeably. My calls often went to voicemail. Invitations became even rarer. When I did visit, conversations seemed strained, with Vanessa frequently steering discussions toward acquaintances whose children had bought vacation homes for their parents or set up generous trust funds. The Andersons just purchased a lovely winter condo in Arizona for Eleanor so she doesn't have to suffer through these cold months, she commented during one visit. Isn't that thoughtful? I told James that's the kind of children we want to raise, ones who take care of their parents properly. The irony wasn't lost on me, but I said nothing. My generation didn't believe in reminding our children of what we'd sacrificed for them. Then came the visit that changed everything. James called on a Wednesday evening, his voice uncharacteristically warm. Mom, Vanessa and I were thinking you should come stay this weekend. It's been too long, and the leaves are just starting to turn. Remember how you always loved the fall colors in our neighborhood? I was surprised but pleased. I'd love to, James. Are you sure this weekend works? I know how busy you both are. Absolutely. We insist. When I arrived that Friday, something felt different. James greeted me with a hug that seemed almost desperate in its intensity. Vanessa's smile was fixed, her eyes darting between her husband and me. We're so glad you could make it, she said, taking my small overnight bag. We have a few people coming for dinner tomorrow, some important connections for James's work. We thought it would be nice for you to meet them. That sounds lovely, I replied, waiting for one of them to show me to my room. After an awkward moment, James cleared his throat. So, Mom, we've had to make some changes around here. The guest room is now my home office, as you know, and the other spare room has become Vanessa's project space for her event planning. Oh? I said. Should I take the couch then? Vanessa laughed as if I'd said something amusing. Don't be silly, Eleanor. We wouldn't have you on the couch. We've set up a nice space for you in the basement. It's quite comfortable. My heart sank as James led me downstairs to the unfinished basement. A futon had been placed against one wall, with a small side table and lamp beside it. A folding screen partially concealed a toilet and sink in the corner. What James had once referred to as the emergency bathroom that lacked proper walls or privacy. I know it's not ideal, James said, not quite meeting my eyes. But it's just for 2 nights, and we'll be spending most of the time upstairs anyway. I set my bag down on the futon, feeling the chill from the concrete floor seep through my shoes. It's fine, James. I'm not here for the accommodations. That evening, dinner was a tense affair. Vanessa dominated the conversation with stories about their recent vacation to the Bahamas and plans for a kitchen renovation. When I mentioned Catherine's promotion at work, the subject was quickly changed. James, I said during a rare lull, how are things at the office? Still enjoying the new position? A shadow crossed his face. It's fine. Challenging, but fine. James is being modest, Vanessa interjected smoothly. He's being considered for another promotion. His boss practically guaranteed it at the last company event. Later, as I prepared for bed in the cold basement, I heard raised voices from upstairs. Though I couldn't make out the words, the tone was unmistakable. Vanessa was angry, and James was trying to placate her. I slept poorly, the futon thin and unyielding beneath me. Sometime around midnight, I heard footsteps on the stairs and pretended to be asleep as James stood in the doorway for a long moment before silently retreating. The next morning, I was awakened by more voices, unfamiliar ones. Making myself as presentable as possible in the tiny basement sink, I ventured upstairs to find 2 men in business attire sitting at the kitchen table with James. Papers were spread between them, and James's face was ashen. "Mom," he said, startled by my appearance. "I thought you were still asleep." "Good morning," I said, nodding to the visitors. "I hope I'm not interrupting." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Not at all, Mrs. Westfield, said the older of the two men, rising to shake my hand. I'm Thomas Blackwood, and this is my associate, Mr. Chen. We were just discussing some financial matters with your son. There was something familiar about Mr. Blackwood, though I couldn't immediately place him. He had kind eyes that contrasted with his formal demeanor. Mom, why don't you help yourself to coffee? James suggested, clearly wanting me out of the room. Vanessa is at the grocery store getting things for tonight's dinner. She'll be back soon. I poured myself a cup and retreated to the back porch, respecting my son's privacy while wondering what kind of financial matters required a Saturday. Morning meeting at his home. About 20 minutes later, I heard the front door close, and James appeared on the porch, looking shaken. Is everything all right? I asked gently. He sank into a chair beside me, staring out at the manicured lawn that stretched toward a small, artificial pond. Not really, no, he admitted, his voice hollow. We're in trouble, Mom. Serious financial trouble. What kind of trouble, James? He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that my heart ached. The mortgage, for starters. We've missed 3 payments, and there are the credit cards, the home equity line, the car loans. Oh, James, I said softly. I had no idea. No one does. That's the point. He looked at me directly for the first time since I'd arrived. We've been keeping up appearances, but the truth is, we're drowning. My bonus was half what we expected this year, and Vanessa's business isn't bringing in what she projected. Why didn't you say something? I could have— What, Mom? Given us more money after everything you've already done? His laugh was bitter. Besides, Vanessa would never— He stopped abruptly. Vanessa would never what? James sighed. She has certain expectations about how we should live, what we should project to others. Admitting we need help doesn't fit that image. I took his hand, noting how tense it felt in mine. James, who were those men? Representatives from the bank that holds our mortgage. They're giving us one last chance to bring the payments current, before they start foreclosure proceedings. And how much would that take? He named a figure that made my stomach clench. It was substantial. Not quite my entire remaining savings, but close. Before I could respond, we heard Vanessa's car in the driveway. James squeezed my hand. Please don't mention any of this to her. She doesn't know they were coming today. I'll figure something out. That afternoon, I excused myself to rest in the basement, but instead, I made a phone call. The conversation was brief but productive. Then I spent an hour on my tablet, researching and making notes, before finally lying down on the uncomfortable futon to collect my thoughts. By the time I returned upstairs, the house had been transformed for the evening's dinner party. Fresh flowers adorned every surface, candles waited to be lit, and delicious smells wafted from the kitchen where a catering team was hard at work. There you are, Vanessa said, looking elegant in a black cocktail dress. The guests will arrive in an hour. I've laid out some things in the downstairs bathroom you might want to use to freshen up. The things turned out to be a new blouse and costume jewelry, along with a note that read, "Please wear these instead of your travel clothes. V." I changed into the blouse but left my own simple gold necklace, Robert's last gift to me, in place. When I emerged, Vanessa's tight smile told me she'd noticed but wouldn't make a scene before her guests arrived. The dinner party consisted of 3 couples, all connected to James's company in some way. The conversation revolved around vacation homes, private schools, and recent renovations. I smiled and nodded at appropriate intervals, watching my son become increasingly tense as the evening progressed, especially when the topic turned to real estate. Property values in Oak Ridge are just skyrocketing, said one of the wives, gesturing with her wine glass. The Miltons sold their place for almost double what they paid 5 years ago. You two made such a smart investment buying when you did. Vanessa beamed. We always say that real estate is the foundation of wealth building. Speaking of real estate, I said, setting down my fork, I had the most interesting conversation today with Thomas Blackwood, such a distinguished gentleman. A hush fell over the dining table. James's fork clattered against his plate as he stared at me with widening eyes. You spoke with Thomas Blackwood? His voice was barely above a whisper. Oh, do you know him? I asked innocently, though of course I knew exactly who he was. Such a distinguished man. We had a lovely chat after he finished his meeting with you this morning. Vanessa's perfect smile remained frozen on her face, but her knuckles whitened around her wineglass. I don't believe we know anyone by that name, do we, James? Before James could respond, one of the guests, the CFO of James's company, if I recalled correctly, leaned forward. Thomas Blackwood from First Capital Trust? Remarkable fellow. His firm has acquired several regional banks recently. Sharp. As they come. That's the one, I confirmed with a warm smile. He mentioned he's quite familiar with this neighborhood. Apparently, his firm has interests in several properties in Oak Ridge Estates. James stared at his plate, a muscle working in his jaw. Vanessa quickly steered the conversation toward the catering company's chocolate soufflé, but the atmosphere had shifted. The veneer of perfection had developed a hairline crack, and we all felt it. After the guests departed around 11, Vanessa rounded on James in the kitchen where I was quietly loading the dishwasher. Who exactly is Thomas Blackwood, and why was he here this morning? Her voice was controlled but razor sharp. James shot me a desperate glance before answering. He's from the bank, the mortgage holder. And you invited him to our home without telling me? Vanessa's voice rose incrementally. What were you thinking? What if someone had seen him? What if— He's the senior loan officer, James interrupted. They're considering foreclosure, Vanessa. I didn't have a choice. The color drained from Vanessa's face. Foreclosure? But you said we just needed to tighten our belts for a few months. You said the promotion would fix everything. I said I hoped it would fix everything, James corrected quietly. But they've given the position to Michael's instead. Vanessa's eyes darted to me, suddenly remembering my presence. Her expression hardened. We should discuss this privately. Eleanor, thank you for your help with the dishes, but we can finish up. Of course, I replied calmly. It's been a long day. I think I'll turn in. As I descended the basement stairs, I heard their argument intensify, Vanessa's voice rising in pitch while James's responses became increasingly defeated. I didn't need to hear the specifics to understand. Their financial house of cards was collapsing, and Vanessa was looking for someone to blame. I sat on the edge of the futon, considering my options. The temperature in the basement had dropped with the evening chill, and I wrapped myself in the thin throw blanket they'd provided. Through the ceiling, I could hear footsteps pacing back and forth, punctuated by the occasional raised voice. Thought about my conversation with Thomas Blackwood earlier that day. After recognizing his name when he introduced himself, I had discreetly followed him outside when he left. Mr. Blackwood? I'd called as he reached his car. Might I have a word? He'd turned, surprised but polite. Mrs. Westfield, isn't it? Of course. I believe we've met before, though you probably don't remember. You were my loan officer at First State Bank when my husband and I purchased our first home in 1979. Recognition dawned slowly on his face. Robert Westfield? The high school science teacher? I nodded, surprised and touched that he remembered after all these years. Of course I remember. One of my first approvals. You paid that. Mortgage off 3 years early, if I recall correctly. 4 years early, I corrected with a smile. Robert was very proud of that. Thomas Blackwood chuckled. Good people, both of you. I'm sorry to hear about Robert's passing. Catherine at the church mentioned it a few years back. She's my sister-in-law. This connection explained why he'd seemed familiar, though we'd only met a handful of times decades ago. May I ask what brings you to my son's home today? I ventured. His expression grew serious. I'm afraid I can't discuss clients' financial matters. Mrs. Westfield, professional ethics. I understand completely, but if the matter concerns a mortgage delinquency, perhaps I could provide some context that might be helpful. He studied me for a long moment. Walk with me to the corner and back? As we strolled slowly down the manicured sidewalk, I gave him a condensed version of my concerns, my son's apparent financial difficulties, the facade of prosperity, and my own limited but potentially helpful resources. The situation is worse than you realize, he finally admitted. 3 missed payments is just the beginning. There's a significant balloon payment coming due in 60 days that they cannot possibly meet, given their current financial status. And what happens then? Foreclosure proceedings would begin immediately. First Capital has a policy of quick resolution in these high-value properties. They don't like drawn-out negotiations that affect the market value. Is there any way to prevent that? He sighed. Honestly, they would need to make the back payments immediately and refinance before the balloon payment comes due. But given their credit status now, refinancing would be nearly impossible through conventional means. I considered this information carefully. What if a third party were to purchase the loan outright? Thomas Blackwood raised an eyebrow. That's not typically how these situations are resolved, Mrs. Westfield. But it's possible. Theoretically, yes, though it would require significant capital and navigating some complex financial arrangements. I have some resources, I said carefully. Not unlimited, but substantial. And I believe I still have an excellent credit rating. He stopped walking, turning to face me directly. Mrs. Westfield, may I speak frankly? What you're suggesting would essentially mean bailing out your son from a situation largely of his own making. There's no guarantee he won't find himself in the same predicament again. I'm aware of that risk, I acknowledged. But I'm not ready to see my son lose his home if there's something I can do to prevent it. After a thoughtful pause, Thomas reached into his pocket and handed me his business card. Call my office on Doha, Monday. I can't promise anything, but I'll look into possible arrangements. Now, sitting in the cold basement, I turned his card over in my fingers. The argument upstairs had reached a lull, replaced by the sound of a door slamming and then silence. The next morning, tension hung in the air like a physical presence. Vanessa remained upstairs while James puttered around the kitchen, making coffee and avoiding my eyes. When I emerged from the basement in my travel clothes, he looked up, startled. "You're leaving?" he asked, disappointment evident in his voice. "I thought you were staying through Sunday evening." "I think it's best if I head home early," I replied gently. "You and Vanessa have a lot to discuss." James slumped into a chair, suddenly looking much older than his 42 years. "Mom, about yesterday. I'm sorry you had to hear all that. And I'm sorry about—" He gestured vaguely toward the basement door. "The accommodations?" I supplied. With a small smile, he nodded, shame coloring his cheeks. "That wasn't my idea. Vanessa insisted we needed to impress the Richardsons with the home office, and her craft room is set up for some event she's planning next week, and—" He stopped himself. "It doesn't matter. I shouldn't have agreed to it. You deserved better." I sat across from him, reaching for his hand. "James, why didn't you tell me things were so difficult financially?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. I was embarrassed, ashamed. After everything you and Dad taught me about responsible money management, I let things spiral out of control. "How?" I asked, not accusingly but seeking understanding. "Your salary is good. The economy has been stable." James sighed deeply. "It started small. The house was at the upper end of what we could afford, but the mortgage broker assured us we'd grow into the payments as my career advanced. Then came the furniture. Vanessa said we couldn't have empty rooms when colleagues visited. The landscaping had to match the neighborhood standards. The cars needed to reflect my professional status." He rubbed his face tiredly. Each decision seemed reasonable in isolation, but together, we've been robbing Peter to pay Paul for years now, taking out new credit cards to pay off old ones, using the home equity line to cover the property taxes, always believing that the next promotion, the next bonus would fix everything. And Vanessa? A complex mix of emotions crossed his face. She grew up with certain expectations about lifestyle. Her father was highly successful, and she's never really adjusted to living with less than she had growing up. When I try to discuss cutting back, she sees it as me failing to provide what I promised. I thought about the woman my son had married. Beautiful, polished, and utterly focused on appearances. Not unlike my own mother, who had driven my father to work 70-hour weeks to maintain the facade of prosperity she demanded. "Do you remember your grandmother Westfield's house?" I asked, changing direction. James looked confused by the shift but nodded. "The little bungalow in Millfield? Sure, we used to visit every Sunday." "What do you remember about it?" A small smile touched his lips. "The cookie jar shaped like a cow, the porch swing where Grandpa would tell stories, the way it always smelled like cinnamon and old books. Do you remember thinking they were poor because their house was small? Or that Grandpa was a failure? Because he worked as a machinist instead of an executive?" "Of course not," James replied. "They were the happiest couple I knew. Grandpa was my hero." "They lived within their means," I said gently. "They saved carefully, paid cash for what they needed, and found joy in simple pleasures. Your grandfather could have taken a management position that paid more, but he knew it would make him miserable. They chose a different kind of wealth." James stared into his coffee cup. "I know, Mom. Somewhere along the way I forgot those lessons." "It's not too late to remember them," I said, squeezing his hand. His expression darkened. "It might be the amount we need to avoid foreclosure. It's substantial. And with my credit score now, refinancing is impossible." I took a deep breath. What if the mortgage were to be purchased by a different lender, one willing to work with you on more reasonable terms? James looked up sharply. "That's not really how it works, Mom. Besides, what bank would take that risk given our current situation?" "Not a bank," I said quietly. "An individual investor." Understanding dawned slowly on his face. "Mom, no, absolutely not. I can't let you risk your security. For my mistakes. It wouldn't be a gift, James. It would be a business arrangement. A mortgage is essentially just a loan secured by property. I would become your lender, with the house as collateral. But your savings are mine to use as I see fit," I interrupted, firmly. "I've already spoken with Mr. Blackwood about the possibility. He's looking into the legal mechanisms." James shook his head in disbelief. "Even if it were possible, Vanessa would never accept that arrangement. Having my mother as our mortgage holder, the loss of face would be unbearable for her." "Perhaps," I acknowledged. "But what's the alternative? Foreclosure? Bankruptcy? Would those be less unbearable?" Before he could respond, Vanessa appeared in the doorway, her expression carefully composed, though her eyes were red-rimmed. "I thought I heard voices," she said. "Eleanor, you're leaving us early?" "I think it's for the best," I replied, rising from my chair. "You and James have important matters to discuss." She nodded stiffly. "James has explained our temporary financial setback. I'm sure it sounds worse than it actually is. These things have a way of resolving themselves." The denial in her voice was so complete that I almost pitied her. "Almost. Indeed they do," I agreed mildly. "Though sometimes resolution requires difficult choices." As James helped me carry my overnight bag to my car, he embraced me with unusual fervor. "I'm so sorry about everything, Mom. The way we've treated you, the basement." I should have stood up to Vanessa. "It's not about the basement, James," I told him, patting his cheek. "It's about remembering what truly matters. Call me tomorrow after you've had time to think. As I drove away, I glanced in my rearview mirror to see him standing in the driveway, looking lost in front of the imposing house that had become both his castle and his prison. I couldn't help but wonder if my intervention would save my son or simply postpone the inevitable reckoning. Either way, I knew that our relationship had reached a crossroads from which there would be no returning to comfortable illusions. The autumn rain followed me all the way home to my small condo, matching my contemplative mood. As I unpacked my barely used overnight bag, I kept thinking about James's face. The shame, the fear, the desperation barely concealed beneath his polished exterior. I picked up a framed photo of my late husband that sat on my nightstand. "What would you do, Robert?" I whispered, tracing his kind face with my fingertip. Robert had always been the more indulgent parent, quick to help our children out of scrapes, but he also believed in natural consequences and learning from mistakes. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. It was my daughter, Catherine. "Mom? You're home already? I thought you were at James's until tomorrow evening." "Plans changed," I said simply. "How are you and Ethan doing?" "We're fine, but never mind us. What happened?" Catherine had always been perceptive, especially when it came to family dynamics. I sighed, settling into my favorite armchair. Let's just say the welcome wasn't quite what I'd expected. Did Vanessa pull something again? I swear that woman, it's complicated, I interrupted, not wanting to drive a further wedge between my children. James is going through some difficulties right now. Financial difficulties, you mean? Catherine said bluntly. Michael told me James called him last month asking for a short-term loan of $20,000. This was news to me. Michael, my youngest, was a high school teacher like his father had been. Certainly not in a position to lend that kind of money. Did Michael give it to him? Catherine snorted. On a teacher's salary? Of course not. He told James he had his own family to support, which is true. James apparently got pretty upset, accused Michael of not caring about family. The irony was painful. I see. Mom, what's really going on? You sound upset. I hesitated, reluctant to betray James's confidence, but needing someone to talk through my options with. Catherine had inherited her father's practical nature and clear thinking. They're in serious financial trouble, I finally admitted. The house, the cars, credit cards. They've been living far beyond their means for years. Now they're facing foreclosure. Let me guess, Catherine said dryly. Vanessa still managed to have you sleep in some uncomfortable spare room while they hosted fancy dinner parties? I winced. The basement, actually. On a futon. The silence on the other end was thunderous. Catherine. No, Mom. That's unacceptable. After everything you've done for them, the money for their down payment, the furniture you gave them when they moved in, and they put you in the basement like some unwanted relative? I couldn't argue with her assessment, though part of me still wanted to make excuses for my eldest. James was embarrassed about it. He said it wasn't his idea. Of course it wasn't, Catherine said sharply. He just went along with it, like he goes along with everything Vanessa wants. That's James's problem. He's spent so long trying to maintain this perfect image that he's lost sight of what actually matters. Her words echoed my own thoughts so closely that I found myself tearing up. He's still your brother, Catherine. Her tone softened. I know, Mom, and I love him, but I hate seeing how they treat you. So what happens now? Are they going to lose the house? I took a deep breath. I'm considering buying their mortgage. Your what? Catherine's voice rose in disbelief. Mom, no, absolutely not. That would take almost everything you have left. Not everything, I corrected gently. And it would be a secured investment. The house is worth more than the loan, even in a depressed market. That's not the point. What about your future? Your security? What if you need long-term care someday? What if... Then my children will help me, I interrupted. just as I'm trying to help James now. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. You know Michael and I would take care of you no matter what. That's not even a question. But James and Vanessa, I'm not sure they would do the same if roles were reversed. Her words stung because I feared they might be true. People can change, Catherine. Sometimes they just need a wake-up call. And you think this will be it? Saving them from foreclosure? Not just saving them, I clarified. Making them accountable. If I become their lender, there will be conditions. Reasonable ones, but firm. Catherine sighed heavily. I know that tone. You've already made up your mind. Not entirely, I hedged, though we both knew better. I'm meeting with Thomas Blackwood and my financial advisor on Monday to discuss options. Just promise me you'll protect yourself, Mom. Legally, I mean. Get everything in writing. I promise, I assured her, touched by her concern. After we hung up, I spent the evening making notes, researching mortgage transfers and private lending terms. By the time I went to bed, I had a clear outline of what I wanted to propose. Monday morning found me in the tastefully appointed conference room of First Capital Trust, sitting across from Thomas Blackwood and his associate, with my own financial advisor, Sarah Chen, beside me. Mrs. Westfield, I've reviewed the situation thoroughly, Thomas began. And while unconventional, your proposal is feasible. First Capital would be willing to sell your son's mortgage to you at the current payoff amount. Which is? I asked, though I'd already calculated an approximate figure. He named an amount that made Sarah shift uncomfortably beside me. It was substantial, representing about 70% of my remaining assets. And the process? I asked, keeping my voice steady. Relatively straightforward. You would essentially be purchasing the debt, becoming the lender of record. Your son and daughter-in-law would make their mortgage payments directly to you, or to a servicing company of your choice. Sarah cleared her throat. My concern, Eleanor, is that this would concentrate a very large percentage of your assets in a single, relatively illiquid investment with borrowers who have already demonstrated payment issues. That's a valid concern, Thomas acknowledged, which is why I would strongly recommend formal documentation of the terms, including consequences for missed payments. I nodded. I've given that considerable thought. I've drafted some proposed terms I'd like your opinion on. I slid a folder across the table. Thomas reviewed the contents, his eyebrows rising slightly. These are quite comprehensive, Mrs. Westfield. I was a school librarian for 40 years, Mr. Blackwood. I appreciate clear organization and expectations. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Indeed. Well, from a first review, these seem reasonable and legally enforceable. Essentially, you're offering a lower interest rate and extended amortization in exchange for financial transparency, mandatory financial counseling, and certain lifestyle adjustments. Plus the right to review their household budget quarterly, I added. Sarah still looked concerned. Eleanor, have you discussed these terms with James and Vanessa? Will they agree to what amounts to significant oversight of their personal finances? Not yet, I admitted. I wanted to ensure the arrangement was possible before presenting it to them. And if they refuse? Thomas asked carefully. I met his gaze steadily. Then they'll face foreclosure, as they would without my intervention. I'm offering a lifeline, not a blank check. The meeting concluded with a tentative plan. Thomas would prepare the necessary paperwork for the mortgage transfer, contingent upon James and Vanessa agreeing to my terms. Sarah would restructure my investment portfolio to accommodate this major change, ensuring I maintained enough liquid assets for my ongoing needs. As Thomas walked me to my car, he paused. Mrs. Westfield, may I speak frankly? Of course. I've seen many family financial arrangements in my career. They rarely end well unless all parties enter with clear eyes and firm boundaries. I'm aware of the risks, I assured him. I believe you are. Just remember, Helping someone sometimes means letting them experience the consequences of their choices. His words stayed with me as I drove to my next destination, James and Vanessa's home. I hadn't called ahead, deciding a surprise visit would provide the most authentic response to my proposal. It was just past noon when I pulled into their circular driveway. James's car was missing, but Vanessa's sleek silver SUV sat near the garage. I took a steadying breath before ringing the doorbell. Vanessa answered, her surprise poorly concealed behind a practiced smile. She wore yoga attire that probably cost more than my entire wardrobe. "Eleanor, this is unexpected. James is at the office. Actually, I came to speak with both of you, but I can start with you if that's easier." Her smile faltered. "Now isn't really the best time. I have a lunch appointment. In 40 minutes. This won't take long," I said pleasantly but firmly, already stepping past her into the foyer. "And it concerns something rather important to your future." Reluctantly, she led me to the kitchen, where scattered papers indicated she'd been working at the island counter. I recognized credit card statements and past due notices before she hastily gathered them up. "Can I offer you some tea?" she asked, her hospitality clearly an attempt to maintain control of the situation. "No, thank you. I've just come from a meeting with Thomas Blackwood at First Capital." The color drained from her face. "I see. Did James ask you to speak with him?" "No, this was my initiative. I understand your mortgage situation is precarious." Vanessa's posture stiffened. "James has been handling that. We've had a temporary cash flow issue, but it's being resolved." "Is that why you're sorting through overdue notices?" I asked gently, gesturing to the papers she'd tucked under a planner. Her composure cracked slightly. "Our financial matters are private, Eleanor. I appreciate your concern, but First Capital has agreed to sell your mortgage to me," I interrupted, seeing no benefit in prolonging the conversation. "I would become your lender, with modified terms that would make your payments more manageable." Vanessa stared at me, shock and something like horror crossing her face. "You? Buy our mortgage? That's not possible." "I assure you it is. The paperwork is being prepared as we speak. But why would you—" Her voice trailed off as understanding dawned. "James put you up to this, didn't he? This is his solution? Having his mother bail us out?" "James knows nothing about this yet," I clarified. "This is my offer, with my conditions." "Conditions," she repeated flatly. I removed a copy of my terms from my purse and placed it on the counter. "Yes, I believe you'll find them reasonable, but non-negotiable." Vanessa glanced at the paper without touching it, as if it might bite. "I need to discuss this with James." "Of course. That's why I'm here. Can you call him? This concerns both of you." Her jaw tightened, but she reached for her phone. The brief conversation was tense, with Vanessa speaking in clipped phrases. "Your mother is here. No, right now. Something about buying our mortgage. Yes, I think you should come home immediately." While we waited, Vanessa paced the kitchen, occasionally glancing at my terms without commenting. I sat calmly at the counter, observing the home in daylight. The signs of financial strain were subtle but present. A designer vase with artificial flowers rather than fresh ones, mail piled unopened on a side table, small areas where maintenance had been neglected. 20 minutes later, James burst through the door, his tie askew and face flushed. "Mom? What's going on? Vanessa said something about our mortgage?" I stood to greet him. "Let's sit down. I have a proposal for both of you." We gathered in their formal dining room, a space that, despite its expensive furnishings, felt unlived in and cold. I explained my meeting with Thomas Blackwood, the possibility of purchasing their mortgage, and my proposed terms. James listened intently while Vanessa's expression grew increasingly closed. "These terms," James said carefully, reviewing the paper I'd brought. "They're quite detailed." "Intrusive is the word you're looking for," Vanessa interjected, her voice tight. Quarterly budget reviews? Mandatory financial counseling? Approval for any purchase over $500? This is insulting. It's protective, I corrected calmly. Of my investment and your future. I'm offering a significant reduction in your interest rate and an extended repayment period. In exchange, I need assurance that the underlying issues will be addressed. By treating us like children, Vanessa snapped, having to ask permission to spend our own money. Money you don't currently have, I pointed out. These terms are temporary. 2 years of close oversight, followed by a reassessment. If you've demonstrated responsible financial management, many restrictions would be lifted. James looked torn, understanding the lifeline being offered but clearly uncomfortable with the conditions. Mom, I appreciate what you're trying to do, but Vanessa's right. This level of oversight feels excessive. Consider the alternative, I said quietly. Foreclosure. Credit destroyed for years, starting over with nothing. There are other options, Vanessa insisted. Refinancing. Not with your current credit scores, I interrupted gently. James, you know this is true. A heavy silence fell over the table. James stared at the terms, conflict evident on his face. There's one more thing, I said, deciding to lay all my cards on the table. A personal condition not listed in the formal terms. They both looked at me warily. If I become your lender, saving this house and your credit rating, I will never again be relegated to sleeping in your basement. I will be treated with the respect and consideration that should be afforded to any guest in your home, particularly one who has helped you significantly. That's non-negotiable. James flushed with shame, but Vanessa's eyes flashed with indignation. So that's what this is really about? You were offended by the sleeping arrangements, and now you're using our financial situation to— Vanessa, stop, James cut in, his voice uncharacteristically firm. Mom is right. We treated her poorly, and now she's offering to risk her financial security to help us. The least we can do is acknowledge that. Surprise flickered across Vanessa's face at her husband's interruption. She fell silent, her lips pressed into a thin line. James turned to me, genuine remorse in his eyes. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything, for not standing up for you, for letting things get to this point. You deserve better. Thank you, James, I said softly. But this isn't about apologies. It's about choices and their consequences. I'm offering you a choice now, one with clear terms and expectations. You don't have to accept it. And if we don't, Vanessa asked, a challenge in her voice. Then you'll face foreclosure, as you would without my intervention, I replied evenly. I won't judge you either way. But I won't continue to enable financial patterns that are destroying your future and your marriage. The word marriage landed like a stone in still water, sending visible ripples of discomfort between them. I hadn't meant to address it so directly, but the tension between them had been palpable since I arrived. We need time to discuss this, James said finally. Of course, I agreed, rising from my chair. Thomas Blackwood needs your decision by Friday. That gives you 3 days. As James walked me to the door, he paused in the foyer, lowering his voice. Thank you for doing this, Mom, for being willing to help despite everything. I love you, James. That doesn't change even when I disagree with your choices. And if we accept your terms? What then? I squeezed his arm gently. Then we start rebuilding. Your finances, your future, and perhaps our relationship too. As I drove away, I caught sight of them in my rearview mirror, standing in the doorway of their beautiful home, a home they might lose or might save, depending on choices they had yet to make. Whatever they decided, I knew our family would never be quite the same again. And perhaps, I thought as the grand houses of Oak Ridge Estates receded behind me, that wasn't entirely a bad thing. Thursday afternoon, 3 days after presenting my proposal, I was tending to my small balcony garden when my phone rang. James's name flashed on the screen, sending a flutter of nerves through my stomach. Tomorrow was the deadline for their decision. "Hello, James," I answered, trying to keep my voice neutral. "Mom." His voice sounded strained, exhausted. "Can we meet today? Vanessa and we've made our decision." I brushed soil from my gardening gloves. "Of course. Would you like me to come to you?" "No," he said quickly. "Not the house. Could we meet at Riverside Park? Near the old boathouse? Around 4? The request surprised me. Riverside Park held special significance for our family. It was where Robert had taught the children to fish, where we'd celebrated birthdays with simple picnics, where James had proposed to his first girlfriend, who had gently declined, much to his teenage heartbreak. "I'll be there," I promised. The autumn afternoon was crisp and golden as I walked along the familiar path to the boathouse. Fallen leaves crunched beneath my feet, their earthy scent mingling with the river's dampness. I spotted James sitting, alone on a bench overlooking the water, his shoulders hunched against the gentle breeze. He looked up as I approached, offering a tired smile that didn't reach his eyes. I noticed he wore old jeans and a faded flannel shirt, weekend clothes I hadn't seen him in for years, so different from his usual carefully pressed business attire. "No Vanessa?" I asked, settling beside him. He shook his head. "She's meeting with her parents. They're part of this conversation, actually." He hesitated, picking at a loose thread on his cuff. "Mom, before I tell you our decision, I need to explain some things." I waited silently, giving him space to find his words. "After you left on Monday, Vanessa and I had the biggest fight of our marriage. She was furious about your terms, said they were controlling and humiliating." He gave a hollow laugh. The irony of that accusation wasn't lost on me. "And what did you think?" I asked carefully. "I thought they were fair," he admitted. "Strict, but fair. The kind of structure we clearly need." He tossed a small stone into the water, watching the ripples spread. That realization led to a longer, harder conversation about how we got here. A family of ducks paddled past, the mother leading 4 nearly grown ducklings in a perfect line. James watched them, seeming to gather his thoughts. "You asked me once why we didn't tell you about our financial troubles. I said it was shame, which was partly true. But it was also because admitting it to you meant admitting it to myself." His voice grew quieter. "And admitting that I've been living a lie for years now." "What kind of lie, James?" He turned to face me fully. "The lie that I'm happy, that this life Vanessa and I created, the house, the cars, the country club membership, all of it, is what I actually want." The admission hung in the air between us, as significant as it was unexpected. "When did you realize this?" I asked gently. "I think I've known for a while, but seeing you sleeping in that basement..." He winced at the memory. "Something broke in me, Mom. The way we treated you, the woman who gave me everything, who helped us buy that house in the first place. It made me see what I've become. What we've become." He fell silent as an elderly couple walked past, nodding politely in our direction. When they were out of earshot, he continued. "I spent 2 days pulling together all our financial records. The full picture is worse than I'd admitted, even to myself. We're not just behind on the mortgage. We have over $70,000 in credit card debt. Both cars are financed at ridiculous interest rates. And Vanessa's business hasn't shown a profit in 3 years despite constant investment in equipment and supplies." I kept my expression neutral despite my shock at the figures. "And Vanessa? How did she respond to this accounting?" "Initially with denial, then anger. Then..." He sighed heavily. "She called her parents. They've always bailed her out before. She assumed they would again." "And did they?" James's laugh was without humor. "They're in worse shape than we are. Turns out her father's real estate development company has been struggling for years. The lavish lifestyle they maintain is as much an illusion as ours. They've been keeping up appearances by liquidating assets and taking out loans against their retirement accounts. I thought about Vanessa's constant references to her parents' success, the implied comparisons to our more modest family achievements. That must have been a difficult revelation for her. Devastating, James confirmed. Her entire self-image is built around the social status her parents represented. Finding out it was largely smoke and mirrors, he shook his head. She hasn't been the same since. A cool breeze rippled across the water, causing James to pull his jacket closer. Anyway, after all that, we sat down together last night and really talked. Probably the most honest conversation we've had in our marriage. And what did you decide? He took a deep breath, as if preparing to dive into cold water. We're declining your offer, Mom. Though I'd prepared myself for either answer, his words still landed with unexpected weight. I see. May I ask why? Because you were right about everything. The terms you proposed weren't just about protecting your investment. They were about forcing us to face reality and take responsibility. His eyes, so like his father's, met mine steadily. But I realize now that's something we need to do on our own, without another safety net. I studied my son's face, seeing a new resolve in his expression. What will you do instead? We're selling the house, he said simply. We've already contacted a realtor. Even in a quick sale, there should be enough equity to pay off the mortgage and most of the other debts. We'll take the credit hit for whatever remains and rebuild from there. And where will you live? Vanessa's uncle has a small rental property in Millfield, near where Grandma's house used to be, actually. It's a 2-bedroom duplex, nothing fancy, but the rent is reasonable and he's willing to give us a chance despite our credit issues. He smiled faintly. A significant downsize, but that's rather the point. This is a dramatic change, I observed. How is Vanessa handling it? James hesitated. It's been challenging. Her initial reaction was absolute refusal. But when faced with the alternatives, bankruptcy, foreclosure, or accepting your terms, she finally acknowledged we need a fresh start. He looked down at his hands. I won't pretend she's embraced the idea completely, but she's agreed to try. And your marriage? Will it survive this transition? The bluntness of my question startled him, but he seemed relieved by the opportunity for candor. I don't know, Mom. That's the honest answer. We've built our relationship on a foundation that's crumbling. Whether we can construct something more solid depends on both of us being willing to examine what we truly value. I reached for his hand, weathered now with the beginnings of middle age. That's a very mature perspective, James. I had good teachers, he replied, squeezing my fingers. It just took me a while to remember their lessons. We sat in companionable silence, watching the river flow past. The park had been a constant in our lives while so much else changed: careers, homes, relationships. Its enduring presence felt reassuring now. I need to apologize to you, Mom, James finally said. Not just for the basement, though that was inexcusable. For everything. For the way I've treated you. For not appreciating what you and Dad taught me. For letting Vanessa dictate the terms of our family relationships. I appreciate that, I said softly. But I'm more interested in moving forward than dwelling on past hurts. I want to move forward too, he affirmed. But differently than before. More honestly. He hesitated. There's something else I need to tell you. The seriousness in his tone concerned me. What is it? I've been offered a job in Cleveland. A lateral move in terms of position, but with a company whose values align better with my own. Less prestige, more purpose. Cleveland is 3 hours away, I observed, my heart constricting slightly at the thought of him moving farther from me. Yes, but with reasonable housing costs that would allow us to live within our means. He studied my reaction. I wanted to discuss it with you before accepting. James, you don't need my permission to make career decisions. I know. But I value your perspective and... He looked embarrassed. I'd like your help finding a place to live if we go. Somewhere modest but with a real guest room where you could stay comfortably when you visit. Maybe even a small garden space like you've always had. The simplicity of... This request touched me deeply. Not grand gestures or expensive gifts, but a genuine desire for my involvement in his life in a meaningful way. I'd like that very much, I told him. As we walked back along the riverbank toward the parking area, James brought up another subject that had clearly been weighing on him. Catherine called me yesterday, he said. She was direct about her feelings regarding my treatment of you. I winced. I may have mentioned the basement situation to her. Good, he said, surprising me. I deserved her anger. Michael called too, after Catherine spoke with him. It was probably the most uncomfortable conversation of my life, but necessary. He looked pensive. I've been a terrible brother to them, especially since marrying Vanessa. Always too busy, too important for family gatherings unless they happened on my terms. It's never too late to change that, I reminded him. I'm trying. I've invited them both to dinner next week, at a modest restaurant. Nothing flashy, just family reconnecting. He shot me a sidelong glance. You'll come too? I wouldn't miss it, I assured him. When we reached my car, James surprised me with a fierce embrace, holding on longer than he had since childhood. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. The offer, the wake-up call, not giving up on me even when I deserved it. I'm your mother, I said simply. That doesn't change, even when you make mistakes. As I drove home, my emotions were complex. Relief that James had found clarity, disappointment that he'd declined my offer, hope for his future, uncertainty about whether Vanessa would truly embrace their new direction. Above all, I felt a tentative optimism that our relationship might recover what had been lost. The following Tuesday evening found me seated at a corner table in Vincenzo's, a family-owned Italian restaurant that had been a favorite of ours when the children were growing up. No white tablecloths or sommelier here, just hearty food, reasonable prices, and the comfort of familiar surroundings. I arrived early, wanting a moment to gather my thoughts before what promised to be an emotional reunion. To my surprise, James was already there, setting a small vase of daisies, my favorite, in the center of the table. Mom, he greeted me warmly. I was hoping to beat you here. These are for you. They're lovely, thank you. I touched the simple flowers, more meaningful than any expensive bouquet. Where's Vanessa? A shadow crossed his face. She's not coming. We had another difficult conversation last night about the Cleveland job. I've decided to accept it, and she's... He trailed off. Not supportive? I suggested gently. She says she needs time to think about whether she wants to leave her business and social connections here. I told her I understood, but that I'm going regardless. The firmness in his voice was new. For the first time, I could see him setting boundaries, making decisions based on his own values rather than accommodating Vanessa's expectations. That must have been difficult, I said. Terrifying, he admitted, but also liberating. Before we could discuss it further, Catherine arrived with Ethan, now 12 and sprouting up like a weed. The boy hugged me enthusiastically before turning to his uncle with shy curiosity. It had been nearly a year since they'd seen each other, and I realized with a pang how much James had missed of his nephew's childhood. Hey, sport, James said, awkwardly extending his hand. You've grown about a foot since I saw you last. Instead of taking the offered handshake, Ethan impulsively hugged his uncle. Mom says you're moving to Cleveland. Will you have room for me to visit? My friend Jake went to Cleveland and they have this really cool science museum with an actual space capsule you can sit in. James's surprise melted into genuine pleasure. Absolutely. You'll be my first official visitor. Michael arrived moments later with his wife Lily, completing our circle. There was initial awkwardness as the siblings navigated their complicated emotions, but it dissolved gradually over shared bread and childhood stories. Remember when Dad took us fishing and James fell in the river trying to net that tiny bluegill? Michael laughed. Only because you startled me, James protested good-naturedly. And as I recall, you were the one who sat on the tackle box and ended up with a hook in your— There are children present, Catherine interrupted, gesturing toward Ethan, who was listening with fascinated amusement to these glimpses of his uncle's younger selves. As the evening progressed, I watched my family healing, hesitantly at first, then with increasing warmth. James shared his plans for Cleveland with growing enthusiasm, including details about the company's environmental initiatives that clearly aligned with his personal values. I never knew you cared about conservation issues, Michael commented, sounding genuinely interested. James looked slightly embarrassed. I've always cared. I just stopped talking about it. It didn't fit with the image I thought I needed to project. And now? Catherine asked. Now I'm more concerned with substance than image, James replied. Long overdue, I know. As we shared dessert, one tiramisu with 5 forks, a family tradition, James cleared his throat nervously. I have something to say to all of you, he began. I've been a poor brother and a worse son these past few years. I got caught up in appearing successful rather than living authentically. I chose status over connection. He looked at each of us in turn. I'm sorry for the distance I created, for the family events I missed, for the ways I made you feel less important than my career or social climbing. Catherine's expression softened. We've missed you, James. The real you. I've missed me too, he admitted, and I've missed all of you more than I allowed myself to acknowledge. Michael raised his water glass in a small toast. To new beginnings, then. To family, James added, his eyes meeting mine with quiet gratitude. Later, as we stood in the parking lot saying our goodbyes, James pulled me aside. I meant to tell you, we found a buyer for the house. It's happening faster than we expected. That's good news, I said. When do you close? 3 weeks. We're packing now, separating what we need from what we were just accumulating. His smile was rueful. It's a sobering process. And Vanessa? He sighed, taking it day by day. She's struggling with the loss of status, the judgment she anticipates from her social circle. But she's agreed to come to Cleveland for at least 3 months to see if she can adjust. He shrugged slightly. That's all I can ask for now. I hope she finds her way, I said sincerely. Change is difficult for everyone. James nodded thoughtfully. You know what's strange? I feel more hopeful now, facing foreclosure and starting over, than I did when we seemed to have everything under control. Perhaps because authenticity brings its own peace, I suggested. Even when circumstances are challenging. He hugged me. Goodbye, whispering in my ear. No more basements, Mom. I promise. As I drove home to my modest condo, I reflected on the unexpected journey of the past 2 weeks. What had begun with humiliation in a cold basement had transformed into a catalyst for profound change. James's financial crisis had forced him to confront deeper issues of identity and purpose, potentially saving not just his bank account, but his authentic self. I thought about Robert, how proud he would be of our son's belated but sincere course. Correction. You were right, I whispered to his memory. He had to find his own way back. We just needed to be patient. My phone chimed with a text message from James. Thank you for not bailing me out. I needed to fall to remember how to stand. On my own. The wisdom in his words brought tears to my eyes. Sometimes love means offering a safety net, and sometimes it means allowing someone to face the consequences of their choices. The trick, I was learning even at 68, was knowing which form of love was needed in each moment. As I parked Outside my small condo, so different from James's grand house but truly mine in every way that mattered, I felt a deep contentment. My son was finding his way back to himself, my family was reconnecting, and I had stood my ground with dignity. The basement had been a low point, but perhaps a necessary one. The cold, concrete foundation from which something more authentic could finally grow. 6 months passed in a blur of change and adjustment. The winter had been harsh, but was finally yielding to spring's tender green promises. I stood on the small balcony of my condo, repotting the herbs that had survived the cold months indoors, when my phone rang. It was James. "Mom, how are you?" His voice sounded lighter than it had in years, the strain and pretense replaced by genuine warmth. "I'm fine, dear. Just getting my garden ready for spring. How's Cleveland treating you?" "It's good, really good, actually." "That's partly why I'm calling. Do you have plans for next weekend? I'd love for you to come visit." I smiled, pleased by the invitation. Since moving to Cleveland 3 months ago, James had called regularly and visited twice, but I hadn't yet seen his new place. "I'd love to. How's the unpacking coming along?" There was a slight hesitation. "That's the other reason I'm calling. There have been some developments here." "Nothing bad," he added quickly. "Just changes I'd like to talk about in person." My mind immediately went to Vanessa. After much deliberation, she had joined James in Cleveland 6 weeks ago, attempting to make their marriage work, despite the dramatic lifestyle adjustment. I'd spoken with her briefly during their transition, stilted, polite conversations that revealed little about her true feelings. "Is everything all right with Vanessa?" "It's complicated," he admitted. "But we're figuring things out. I'll explain everything when you're here." We made arrangements for my visit, and I found myself looking forward to seeing this new chapter of James's life. The company he'd joined was focused on sustainable building materials, a surprising departure from his previous corporate path, but one that seemed to energize him in our phone conversations. The following Friday afternoon, I boarded a train to Cleveland, enjoying the leisurely journey through countryside just beginning to bloom. James met me at the station, his appearance subtly transformed from when I'd last seen him. Gone was the expensive haircut and designer clothing. Instead, he wore comfortable jeans and a simple button-down, his hair slightly longer and more natural. Most notably, the perpetual furrow between his brows had smoothed, making him look years younger. "Mom!" He embraced me warmly. "You look wonderful." "So do you," I replied honestly. "Cleveland seems to agree with you." He smiled, taking my small suitcase. "It's not just Cleveland, it's everything. The job, the lifestyle change, the perspective shift." He led me to a modest sedan, not new but well-maintained. "Sorry about the car. Quite a downgrade from what we used to drive." "It's perfectly nice," I assured him, "and it gets you where you need to go, which is what matters." As we drove, James pointed out landmarks and shared stories about his new workplace, the collaborative environment, the mission-driven approach, the satisfaction of creating products that reduced environmental impact. His enthusiasm was palpable and reminded me of when he was younger, before status and appearances became his driving motivations. "What about Vanessa?" I finally asked as we turned into a tree-lined neighborhood of modest homes. "How is she adjusting?" His expression grew more complex. "That's part of what I wanted to talk to you about." He pulled into the driveway of a small but charming craftsman-style house with a deep front porch. "But first, welcome to my new home." I noted his wording, "my home, not our home," but didn't comment as he showed me inside. The interior was cozy and unpretentious, furnished simply but thoughtfully. Large windows let in ample natural light, and bookshelves lined one wall of the living room. Most surprisingly, family photos were prominently displayed, pictures of all of us together during happier times. images I hadn't seen in Vanessa's carefully curated decor schemes. "This is lovely, James," I said, genuinely impressed by the warm, inviting space. "It's a work in progress," he replied, seeming pleased by my reaction. "Come on, let me show you to your room." He led me upstairs to a small but comfortable guest bedroom, painted a soft blue with crisp white trim. A vase of fresh daffodils sat on the nightstand, and the window overlooked a backyard with raised garden beds just beginning to show growth. "I remember you mentioned wanting to have a real guest room," I observed, setting my bag on the bed. "And I meant it," he said simply. "You're always welcome here, Mom." I noticed again what was missing. Any sign of Vanessa's presence. No feminine touches in the decor, no evidence of her personal items. "James," I began carefully. "Where is Vanessa?" He sighed, leaning against the doorframe. "Let's go downstairs. I'll make us some tea and explain everything." In the kitchen, modest but functional, nothing like the showpiece kitchen of their previous home, James prepared tea while I sat at the small oak table. The silence between us was comfortable, not strained as it had been for so many years. "Vanessa moved out 3 weeks ago," he finally said, placing steaming mugs before us. "We're divorcing." Though not entirely unexpected given the circumstances, the news still took me by surprise. "I'm sorry, James." "I'm not," he replied, then quickly amended. "That sounds harsh. What I mean is, I'm sad that our marriage couldn't survive the changes we needed to make, but I'm not sorry for the changes themselves." "What happened?" James stirred his tea thoughtfully. "She tried. I'll give her that. She came to Cleveland, took a job at a local event planning company, attempted to adapt to our new financial reality. But ultimately, she couldn't reconcile herself to what she saw as a step backward." "And you?" "I found it liberating," he admitted. "Living within our means, working for something I believe in, reconnecting with what actually matters to me." The more I embraced it, the more Vanessa resented it. He took a sip of tea. "The final straw was when her parents called, offering to rescue us from our situation." "Rescue? I thought they were in financial trouble themselves." "They are." He shook his head ruefully. "But they scraped together enough, probably by going further into debt, to offer us a down payment on a house in Shaker Heights, the upscale part of Cleveland. They couldn't bear the thought of their daughter living in a modest neighborhood." "And you declined." "I did." Vanessa couldn't understand why. To her, it was a chance to reclaim our former status. To me, it was a return to the trap we'd just escaped. He ran a hand through his hair. "We had the most honest conversation of our marriage that night. I finally admitted that I never wanted the life we'd built in Oak Ridge Estates. The keeping up with the Joneses, the constant financial stress, the endless status competition. I did it because I thought it would make her happy, and because part of me bought into the idea that success meant having the biggest house, the newest car. And Vanessa. She admitted she couldn't be happy without those external validations, that her self-worth has always been tied to appearances, to what others think." His eyes met mine, clear and direct. "We realized we want fundamentally different things from life. No amount of compromise could bridge that gap." I reached across the table to squeeze his hand. "I'm sorry it ended this way, but I'm proud of you for being honest with yourself and with her. The strange thing is, it's probably the healthiest interaction we've ever had. No manipulation, no passive-aggressive jabs, just raw honesty." He smiled sadly. "We're handling the divorce amicably. No contest, clean break, minimal assets to divide since we'd liquidated almost everything anyway." I studied my son, the new lines around his eyes that spoke of difficulty, but also the easier set of his shoulders, the genuine quality of his smile. "And how are you, really?" "Lighter," he said after a moment's reflection. "Sad sometimes, relieved other times. Mostly I feel like I'm becoming myself again, Or maybe becoming myself for the first time. He glanced around the kitchen, then back to me. I know this place is nothing like what you saw me living in before, but it feels like a home, I finished for him. Your home. His smile was worth every difficult moment of the past several months. Exactly. After dinner, a simple but delicious pasta dish. James prepared himself, another surprising development. We sat on the front porch with glasses of lemonade, watching fireflies begin to appear in the gathering dusk. Catherine and Michael are coming next month, James told me. Michael's bringing the kids to see the science museum Ethan was so excited about. That's wonderful, I said, delighted by this evidence of continued family reconnection. I've been thinking a lot about Dad lately, James said, his tone growing more contemplative, about the lessons he tried to teach me that I was too stubborn or too distracted to learn, such as, that contentment comes from living authentically, not from accumulating stuff or impressing others. He leaned back in his chair, gazing at the deepening sky. Remember how he turned down that administration job because he said teaching actual students made him happier than managing budgets would? I nodded, touched that James remembered this. He never regretted that decision, even though the salary difference was substantial. I used to think he lacked ambition, James admitted. Now I realize he had perfect clarity about what truly mattered to him. Your father was the wisest man I've ever known, I said softly. Not because he never made mistakes, but because he learned from them instead of repeating them. I'm trying to follow his example, James replied. Better late than never. The following morning, James took me on a walking tour of his neighborhood. Unlike the sterile perfection of Oak Ridge Estates, this area hummed with genuine community life, people chatting on porches, children riding bikes on sidewalks, a small farmer's market in the nearby park. "Morning, James," called an elderly man, tending roses in his front yard. "This must be your mother you've been telling us about." "Mr. Castillo, this is my mom, Eleanor," James introduced me. "She's visiting from Millfield." "Wonderful to meet you," Mr. Castillo said warmly. "Your son has been a real asset to the neighborhood. Helped me install rain barrels last weekend, and he's organizing the community garden expansion." I raised an eyebrow at James as we continued walking. "Community garden?" He looked slightly embarrassed. "It's just a vacant lot we're converting. The company encourages community involvement, and I've always enjoyed gardening. Remember how I used to help you with the vegetables when I was young?" "I remember," I said, touched that he recalled those simple pleasures we'd once shared. "I just didn't realize you were still interested in it." "I rediscovered a lot of old interests once I stopped trying to impress people who didn't actually care about me," he replied wryly. At the farmer's market, James greeted vendors by name, introduced me to neighbors, and selected fresh produce with knowledgeable care. I watched him interact with this community he'd joined so recently, struck by how much more genuine these connections seemed than the superficial networking he'd prioritized in his previous life. "You seem at home here," I observed as we sat on a park bench, sharing a bag of freshly picked cherries. "I am," he confirmed. "More than I ever felt in Oak Ridge Estates." "And work? Is it fulfilling what you hoped?" His face lit up. "Beyond what I hoped. We're developing building materials from agricultural waste, things farmers would normally burn or discard. It's challenging work, but deeply satisfying." He popped a cherry into his mouth, considering his next words. "Actually, there's something else I wanted to tell you about that front." "Oh?" "I've been offered a leadership role in a new initiative, establishing community-based manufacturing hubs in economically disadvantaged areas. It would mean more responsibility, some travel, but also the chance to create meaningful employment in places that need it." "That sounds perfect for you," I said sincerely. "The salary is modest by my old standards," he acknowledged, "but more than adequate for my needs now, and the purpose behind it." He shook his head, eyes bright with enthusiasm. "It matters, Mom. It actually matters." Impulsively, I reached out to hug him. "I'm so proud of you, James. Not because of a job title or salary, but because you're following your heart." That evening, we cooked dinner together, a simple pleasure we hadn't shared in years. As we chopped vegetables side by side, James brought up a subject that clearly had been on his mind. "Mom, I need to thank you properly." "For what?" "For not bailing me out when I asked. For offering terms that forced me to really consider what mattered." He set down his knife, turning to face me. "If you had simply given me the money with no conditions, I would have stayed trapped in a life that was making me miserable. Your tough love gave me the push I needed to make real changes." "It wasn't easy," I admitted. "Every instinct told me to protect you from consequences to make things easier for you. But I remembered something your father used to say. That struggle builds character if we let it," James finished. "I know. I've been thinking about that a lot lately." After dinner, James brought out a small box and placed it on the table between us. "I have something for you." "You didn't need to get me anything," I protested. "It's not exactly a gift," he clarified. "More like a return." Curious, I opened the box to find a set of keys. "What are these for?" "Your new condo," he said simply, "or rather, your original condo." I stared at him, not comprehending. "What do you mean?" "When I sold the house in Oak Ridge Estates, there was more equity than expected. After paying off the mortgage and other debts, I had some funds remaining." His eyes held mine steadily. "I used it to pay off your condo mortgage." Stunned, I tried to process his words. "James, I don't understand. That money could have gone toward a more expensive house here? More stuff I don't need? Another attempt to impress people who don't care about me?" He shook his head firmly. "No. You sold your home to help Catherine when she needed it. You offered to risk your financial security to save me from my mistakes. This is the least I could do to show my gratitude." Tears filled my eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll accept it without argument," he requested gently. "Let me do this one thing to begin making amends for how poorly I've treated you these past years." I looked at the keys, simple metal objects representing so much more than property. They symbolized my son's transformation, his recalibrated priorities, his rediscovered capacity for genuine generosity. "Thank you," I whispered, closing my hand around them. "Not just for this, but for finding your way back to the man I always knew you could be." James smiled, his own eyes suspiciously bright. "I had a good example in you and Dad. I just needed a reminder of what really matters." The remainder of my visit passed in comfortable harmony. We worked together in his garden, planting vegetables similar to those we'd tended when he was a child. We browsed local bookshops and attended a community concert in the park. Each activity was simple, inexpensive, and genuinely enjoyable. No pretense, no status seeking, just authentic connection. On my final morning, as James prepared to drive me to the train station, he hesitated in the doorway. "I forgot to show you something." He led me to a small room off the living room that had been closed during my visit. "I've been working on this all week." He opened the door to reveal a space in transition, partly office, partly craft room. A work table stood in the center, covered with woodworking tools and a half-completed project. "What is this?" I asked, stepping inside. "I'm making furniture," he explained, seeming almost shy. "Nothing fancy, just simple pieces using reclaimed wood. This one's a jewelry box for Catherine's birthday." I examined the partially finished box, noting the careful joinery and thoughtful design. "James, this is beautiful work. Dad taught me. The basics, remember? Those weekends in his workshop when I was 10 or 11? "I remember," I said softly, running my fingers over the smooth wood. "He would be so pleased to see you using those skills." I found his old tools in storage when I was packing. It felt right to bring them here to use them. He gestured to a workbench against the wall, where Robert's carefully maintained tools were organized in the particular way he had always arranged them. When I'm working with these, I feel connected to him somehow. The simple admission brought tears to my eyes. For years, James had defined success in terms that had nothing to do with his father's values. Now he was rediscovering not just skills, but a philosophy Robert had tried to impart, that creating something with your own hands carried a satisfaction no purchased luxury could match. "There's one more thing," James said, reaching under the workbench to withdraw a small finished piece, a delicate wooden box with an inlaid design of intertwined leaves on the lid. "This is for you." I opened it to find a handwritten note inside. "For the woman who taught me that the most valuable things in life can't be bought. Thank you for not giving up on me. Love, James." Words failed me as I clutched the precious gift. Instead, I hugged my son tightly, communicating through that embrace everything my voice couldn't express. On the train ride home, I reflected on the extraordinary journey of the past year. From the humiliation of that basement futon to this moment of profound reconnection, each step, painful though some had been, had led to necessary growth and healing. I thought about the mysterious ways life unfolds, how moments of deepest hurt can become catalysts for transformation. James had needed to lose his material wealth to rediscover his authentic self. He had needed to be refused a bailout to find his own path to redemption. Sometimes love means allowing those we care about to face difficult truths rather than shielding them from consequences. As the landscape rolled past my window, I opened James's wooden box again, rereading his note and tracing the intricate leaf pattern with my fingertip. This gift represented more than craftsmanship. It symbolized a son's return to his roots, a reclamation of values nearly lost beneath the weight of materialism and appearances. The basement that had once represented my lowest moment had become, strangely, the foundation upon which something far more precious had been rebuilt, an authentic relationship with my son, based not on obligation or convenience, but on genuine love and mutual respect. I closed the box gently, smiling at the memory of James in his modest home, surrounded by evidence of what truly mattered: family photos, his father's tools, connections to a real community, purposeful work. He had lost a house but found a home. He had surrendered status but gained authenticity. And I, in that painful moment on a basement futon, had found the courage to offer the hardest kind of love, the kind that refuses to enable self-destruction, that stands firm when compassion demands difficult boundaries. The train rounded a bend, catching the late afternoon sunlight in a brilliant flash that momentarily transformed the ordinary landscape into something magical. In that illuminated moment, I felt a profound gratitude for second chances, for the possibility of renewal that remains available to us at every age and stage of life. James had found his way home, not to a place, but to himself. And in doing so, he had given me the most precious gift a mother could receive, the joy of seeing her child finally become the person they were always meant to be. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.